Yes, welcome to the admissions panel. So our last conference session of the day. Today's session really is designed to provide you with an opportunity to find out more about our admissions processes across the 5 institutions that are here today, and also provide you with a final opportunity, I suppose, in a conference setting anyway, to ask any questions that you might have that may have not necessarily been relevant to some of today's earlier sessions. We're also conscious that lots of you will be dipping in and out of conference sessions due to time zones and other commitments. So this is really a good opportunity just to collate all of your questions together in one place. So to begin with, I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Alex Ingold from LSE, who'll be delivering a short presentation that will outline some of the headline application trends that we've seen in the current application cycle, provide you with a bit of an overview as to how we're looking at competitive institutions. And once we've had our introductory presentation, I'll ask each of the 5 participating institutions to say hello, introduce themselves, and then we will kick off with your questions. So Alex, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and welcome to everybody today. You'll be pleased to know that we have saved the best session for last. So if you have any questions as I go through this short presentation, please do either leave those in the chat and we'll get to them later, or indeed just wait for the panel afterwards when I and some of my colleagues from the other institutions represented here today will go through and answer those for you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just run you through very quickly the trends that are happening in the UK in terms of admissions, and then look at some of the things that you would want to know or need to know about applying to highly selective competitive institutions like those represented here today. Okay, so the headlines from UCAS from the January deadline are that overall application numbers are slightly down, as you can see, but UK applications, again, only very slightly down. It's really down to the drop in EU applications that's caused that decrease. Non-EU international applications are actually up compared to last year. So it's the post-Brexit effect of EU applicants, not choosing not to apply to the UK that's had that effect. But otherwise, things are pretty buoyant in terms of application numbers. In terms of subjects, medicine and related subjects continue to be popular. Business, management, social sciences, all very, very popular with applicants to the UK. The big rises or the big increases are in things like computing, comms and media, liberal arts, humanities, and again, medicine and dentistry. There's been a very small fall in the kind of social science numbers and education and teaching numbers, but very much these are small increases, and in general, the application trends are upwards for most subject areas. Could we get the next slide, please? Okay, so this is looking at what is happening in terms of UK applicants, so those home students that are applying to UK universities. And the headline number is, as you can see, is up compared to last year, a 5% increase. And this is down, partly down to a demographic upshift in the number of 18-year-olds in the UK. So over the next decade, that number will increase, and we'll have more and more students applying to UK universities from the UK, due to peak around 2030. So that's going to rise and continue to rise for at least the next 9 or 10 years. Also of interest are that the number of students applying from the most disadvantaged areas, that's a metric we call POLAR that we use to measure that, has increased. And indeed the number of UK Black applicants and UK Asian applicants has also increased. And if you look at the graph on the very right-hand side, you can see that that increase in non-white applicants has increased over the past decade. So year on year, there's been an increase. So all of this wrapped up together means it's very good news for anybody that's interested in widening access to UK universities, to widening participation and allowing more disadvantaged applicants more access to specifically very prestigious UK universities. Could we get the next slide, please? Okay, so now we're going to look at overseas non-UK applications. And if we take a look at the graph on the right-hand side, first of all, you can see that China is far and away the largest international market, around 25% of all overseas applications to the UK, and indeed an increasing number, 12% more than the previous year. India and Hong Kong also very significant markets. India as well, also seeing significant increases compared to last year. Some of the smaller markets, you've got the top 10 there, are showing considerable growth. So Nigeria up 47%, UAE and Canada both up 17% compared to last year, and some very large increases if you look at it over, say, the previous 10 years. Unsurprisingly, Spain and France showing decreases. Again, this is down to that post-Brexit effect. And the USA perhaps bucking the trend in that they are slightly lower than last year. But I think we can put this down to the fact that the COVID effect, where US universities are just starting to open up again. So some of their students are actually re-engaging with their home universities as much as anything, and more reluctant to travel. Overall, the picture is, very rosy in terms of applications. Applications are on the rise, and the UK remains a very, very popular destination, as I'm sure you're aware. Could we get the next slide, please? Okay, so we've looked at the kind of the numbers, the stats. This is just to give you an indication of what competitive means in terms of applying to the universities that are here today. So you can see that there's a variety of different ratios in terms of number of applications to number of places. But the one thing that every university, every institution here has in common is that it is very, very competitive. So you can look 8, 9, 10, 15, 12. There are a very, very large number of well-qualified applicants for every place at each of the institutions. And if you look at the detail there, some of the very, very most competitive programs, it's far, far higher than the average. And you could be looking at very, very small numbers of places to very, very large numbers of applications. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning at this point is that most of these applications are very, very good. They're from very good students. So it's not just the sheer volume of applications, it's also the quality of the applications that has an impact here. Could we get the next slide, please? Okay, so what does it mean to apply to a competitive university, a competitive institution? What are we looking for, and how would an applicant demonstrate that? So clearly we're looking for academic merit, academic potential. I think potential is probably the thing to underline there. We're not always looking for the finished article. We like to see where there's potential as well. So where a student is, on an upward curve, upward trajectory in terms of their academic journey, and we would like to see that in their application and like to make offers to those students, not just the finished articles. Enthusiasm, engagement with the discipline, and suitability for the course. So we want students that are passionate about the course they're applying for, that they really engage with that subject area, and they can show that they're going to be really, really good students when they come to our institutions. So who makes the assessment? Well, it varies is the honest answer. There are centralized admissions teams, sometimes decentralized admissions teams, and sometimes a combination of the two. So at LSE, for example, at undergraduate level, we are almost completely centralized, whereas at postgraduate level, it's a mixture. So some decisions are made centrally and some are devolved to the academic departments. And each of the institutions here will have a slightly different way of running their admissions. But the underlying thing that there will always be a commitment to fairness, a commitment to transparency, and a commitment to making decisions with the due care and attention that they deserve. So assessments can be made either, as I say, centrally by admissions assessors or specialists, or perhaps in the departments by departmental tutors. So it can be, somebody within the academic department or somebody within the admissions team. But the one thing that will definitely be the case is it will be an expert, somebody that understands qualifications, that understands the program and the subject area, and that is well placed to make those decisions. So how would an applicant demonstrate their suitability for one of the programs? Well, firstly, we would look at things like grades, whether they're predicted grades or actually achieved grades. And most of our programs have their entry requirements expressed as A-levels or IB points. So the range from maybe something like 3 Bs to A*, or 35 to 40 IB points in the IB diploma. We look for a proven academic record, so GCSEs or perhaps middle year program, IB middle year program, or indeed some other equivalent qualification, depending on where the student is studying. We look sometimes for additional tests, so things like the LNAT for law, or perhaps portfolios for art, design, music programs. And of course, we also look at the UCAS reference and personal statement very, very closely. And you will have hopefully been in sessions over the last couple of days where we'll have gone through that in greater detail. And finally, we do, some of us interview, and sometimes for different programs, sometimes more widely, but that is a possibility for assessment as well. Okay, could we move on, please? Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, predicted grades. So even though we express our standard offers in terms of A-levels and IB mainly, we do accept a whole range of different qualifications. We have equivalencies for different qualifications from all around the world, and we're very, very good at making those judgments. At LSE, we have applicants from somewhere in the region of 140, 150 different countries every year, and lots of those students will not be applying with A-levels or IB. We are perfectly able to make offers for different range of qualifications. We look at subject combinations. So sometimes subject combinations are very important when looking at an application. If it shows the engagement with the subject, a very good preparation in terms of the right subjects for that particular subject area. And also sometimes there are mandatory specific subject requirements. So if you want to do a maths program at university, it's very likely that you'll be asked for a maths qualification to kind of show that you have the ability to take that onto a higher level. In terms of retakes, most of us will prefer students that take all of their results, all of their exams in one sitting. So retakes might not be preferred. However, we do know that there are sometimes individual circumstances or situations that mean that that's not possible, and we will absolutely take that into account. And finally, just a note on contextual data, contextual information, mainly for UK students, but we'll use this information to place applications into context. So we look at the school context, school performance. We might look at some of the postcode metrics that I mentioned earlier, like POLAR or IMD, indices of multiple deprivation. We look at things like free school meals data. There are lots and lots of different data points that we can use to place an application in context, and if eligible, send a contextual offer, which is a lower offer for those students that may have seen either educational or other disadvantage through their time at school. I mentioned admissions tests as well, so you can see there's a list of different admissions tests, things like medicine, BMAT, UCAT, maths, MAT and STEP or TEMUA. For law, I mentioned the LNAT earlier, and then maybe STEP. So there are lots of different admissions tests that a student may be asked to sit. Some of them are mandatory and some of them are discretionary, but very much the advice here is to look at each individual institution and see what's required for the programs. This will all be online, so doing the research before applying is absolutely the best thing to do. And also, as I said, there's a portfolio perhaps requirement for arts, architecture, music programs. And indeed, each institution may have specific assessments for it may need to be aware of. And finally, interviews or recruitment activities. Not all institutions or all departments use these. At LSE, we don't have any interviews, but there will be interviews, for example, at Imperial, where the majority of departments will interview. King's, where medicine, dentistry, nursing, midwifery, and indeed some other small-scale programs that will interview as well at different departments. So again, very much the advice is to do the research and to find out if an interview is required and what the guidance is on that. Could we get the next slide, please? Okay, and I think this is the point where I hand back to Sarah and we move into our admissions panel. So thank you for listening to me for the last 15 minutes, and hopefully you have some good questions for us.
Thank you, Alex. Great overview. So hopefully that was useful, particularly for those of you new to the counselling advising process. Hopefully that was a good oversight as to what we're looking for as institutions. So what I am going to do now is invite the panelists from the other universities to turn on their camera and join the session. Lovely, thank you. And what I'll do is ask you each to introduce yourselves, and maybe you could give a sentence or two about what your role at the institution involves. And I know if you've attended some of the other sessions today, You'll be familiar with some of these faces already, particularly if you attended the sessions yesterday, you'll be very familiar with some of these faces, but let's just do a quick introduction, starting off with Imperial, please, Stephanie.
Hello, hi, my name's Stephanie. I'm the Faculty Admissions Manager for Natural Sciences. So I manage a team of 6 and process applications.
Kings, do you want to go next?
Yep. Apologies, I was meant to go unscripted. My name's Jake. I'm the head of undergraduate admissions as of recently. We look after everybody that comes to UCAS. We also look after the International Foundation Programme, summer schools, intercalated, and a few other bits and bobs as well.
LSE, Alex, do you want to reintroduce yourself?
Hello again, my name's Alex. I'm the Undergraduate Admissions Manager, LSE. So my team looks after all undergraduate applications to the school.
And UCL.
Hi, I'm Amy. I'm the Senior Admissions Officer specifically for life science and medical science programs, including medicine.
Great, thank you. And I think we'll hopefully have a representative from SOAS joining us later in today's session as well. Okay, so let's start with some questions relating to qualifications and what kind of qualifications we're looking at in terms of entry. So Alex's presentation mentioned that although we express our standard offers in terms of A-levels and IB, they are by no means the only qualifications that we do accept. One of the questions that's been submitted says, are there any courses at your universities that will not consider APs as entry qualifications? So are there any courses, universities where APs would not be accepted? Nice and simple to start with.
Sorry, I was going to say it's already been noted on there that medicine won't at UCL, but I think most other programs will. Again, it would be displayed on the program page on our website.
Yeah, so our program pages are very useful, very detailed, often very long in some cases, sources of information about the various qualifications that we do and we don't accept. In some cases, there might be qualifications where we may require additional tests. So certainly I know that's the case at LSE. With some qualifications, we may need just more information about the student or the applicant's general academic profile. Okay, so something that we're asked quite frequently is a student applying with only 3 A-levels or only 3 higher level subjects disadvantaged in comparison to an applicant with 4 or more A-levels or higher level subjects? Amy, can I come to you for that one?
No, it's not part of the requirement, so we do not use that as a selection criteria. So it is just the 3 A-levels or IB if they're taking more than 3 higher levels in the IB. There may be specific subjects within that 4 A-levels that they're sitting that we will focus on because it's the program, but any offer would only be for 3 A-levels, and the other one would just be removed from the selection criteria.
And would it be common in those instances to specify which 3 subjects were included as part of the offer?
Yes, we would specify. We do prefer for most programs that students are studying the 3 A-levels in the same year. We do consider if they have sat them early or maybe during year 12, but if they're generally sat outside of year 12, maybe during GCSEs or earlier, that's usually excluded from the offer.
Thanks, Amy. Does anybody have anything they'd like to come in on there?
I would just say, again, because it isn't something that universities are looking for, so they're not any better off if they do 4. And it's really, really important to talk to the students about workload. So I've had this not necessarily for A-levels, but I've often had a lot of students taking, say, 10 APs because they think that that's going to make a university want them more. And what they're doing is actually risking their ability to get the higher grades in the APs that we need because they're just doing too big a workload. So I think it's really important in kind of really talking to the students about the workload that they're doing and why they're doing it.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and it's similar to if any of you were able to attend the personal statement session where we were talking about really the quality of what you're doing. That's what we're interested in, not necessarily just amassing a huge number of qualifications, whether that's APs or MOOCs or anything like that. Now, in terms of APs, and I know this can be a particularly common aspect for students taking APs, is mixed curriculum profiles. So lots of our entry requirements specify, for example, in the IB, that we're looking for the IB diploma, so the full IB diploma. In the US, where schools are looking at offering mixed curriculum profiles, so a combination of IB courses and AP courses, for example, would that be acceptable? Is that something that we would consider? What kind of background information would we need in order to make that assessment? Alex, can I ask you to come in on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we definitely would. Yes, we'd look at them all on an individual case-by-case basis, and you know, we'd transpose the entry requirements as best we could to see that the student could meet those. I would say what information would be useful is just maybe some information about the curriculum, so we know what's offered, and we know, you know, maybe the student isn't able to take certain subjects, so they've taken an AP instead, or vice versa. That's really helpful for us because it helps us, you know, give the reasons behind those choices, and it means that the student doesn't get penalised for something that's not in their control. So if they can't take a certain subject, then, you know, we understand why that's happened.
And what about perhaps a circumstance where the student does have access to, let's say, the full IB diploma or 5 APs, for example, and perhaps they're trying to substitute one of the grade requirements in, let's say, IB higher level maths for an alternative curriculum? Would we assess that differently? Would that be a slightly different situation?
I mean, we would still look at it on a case-by-case basis. I mean, if they were looking to substitute in IB higher level maths, I'd probably advise them not to, because IB higher level maths is pretty difficult. But apart from that, you know, as long as they're meeting the basic standard entry requirements, then it doesn't really matter, you know, how they're getting there.
Does anybody have anything to add? I saw lots of sort of nods. Jake, do you want to come in?
Just a very minor point. We wouldn't accept if you did the same subject in multiple different qualifications. If you had an AP in maths, your IB in maths, and an A-level in maths, that's wonderful. But we would only take one of those, the highest in that example. We'd want a mix of subjects across multiple things. Yeah.
And I think that's a question that's come up quite a lot across the 2 days of the conference and just generally is whether we do have a preferred curriculum, whether there are secret preferences for students taking IBs over APs or sometimes vice versa. Is there any preference for any particular curriculum when we're looking at applications? Stephanie?
Hi, not from Imperial, no, we treat them all equally. We're happy to consider all of them. One thing that I would add that has come up recently in the last couple of cycles is applicants taking the same A-levels with different boards to try and get the grades. So that's come up. But in terms of, we will consider all qualifications approved by the college, and that's listed on our website.
And when the students are taking the same qualification, well, with different exam boards, are they doing that in order to supersede existing qualifications or just to amass qualifications?
I think they're just kind of covering all their bases by doing it with different exam boards. But what we say is, according to our admissions policy, that we use the one that is listed on the UCAS form. So when they're taking multiple exam boards, they don't necessarily list it on the what we've experienced. They haven't listed on their UCAS form, so we just take what was ever listed on their UCAS form as the usable grade.
Thank you. And in cases where, particularly where students might be studying multiple full qualifications, so they might be doing 3 A-levels in addition to another acceptable school curriculum, how would we assess the student in that case? What kind of offer conditions would we be looking at making? How would we decide which curriculum to put the offer conditions in?
So our decisions are made by academics, and in regards to, we do advise academics when they're making an offer to ask for one of the curriculums. If it's different, if they're using 2 different curriculums to meet the entry requirements, then that's different, and then we can make an offer based on that. However, say if someone's doing a full IB and then a full set of AP tests, we would ask the department to be considerate of the student's workload and try and ask just for one set of results. But in regards to that, if the student doesn't meet the entry requirements with one, if they submit their results later on, we do take it into consideration if we have to consider them as a near miss later on in confirmation time.
That was great, thank you, very helpful. In terms of, and this is again something that came up yesterday, in terms of native language qualifications, I know this is something that we all deal with potentially slightly differently across our institutions. If a student has had significant prior exposure to a language, so for instance, they've lived in a country where that language is spoken, or perhaps their parents or the language is spoken quite widely at home, would that language be included in an offer? Would it be excluded from an offer? Maybe we could go institution by institution just so we cover all bases here. Stephanie, can I start with you?
So it depends on, we offer a few courses where there's a language element to it. So where there's a language element to the course, we would consider that subject in terms of A-level or whatever qualification it is. Where it is not involved in a language element of that course, we will take it as a case-by-case basis. We have in the past taken some, but normally, because we're a science and engineering institution, we do prefer sciences, but we look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Great. Jake?
We're happy to accept a native an A-level or qualification in the native language. There are some very minor quirks, so watch out on the entry requirements. I think one that comes to mind is English law or French law. Even if you're a native French individual with French qualifications, you might have to take an extra qualification. Worth checking. We're looking to change that because it's a bit daft, in my opinion. So we're looking to change that, but it's always worth checking on the prospectus, but as a rule, perfectly fine at King's.
A good example of qualification reviews always being in progress there, I think. Alex, LSE?
So LSE, very similar to Imperial. We look at it on a case-by-case basis. If there's been significant prior exposure, we would sometimes exclude that from our offer. I have to say that normally what normally happens is that there's a previous A-level and then there are 3 other A-levels that are being taken. So it's very easy for us to just make the offer for the 3 A-levels that are being sat at that time. But yes, potentially we would exclude it for an offer, so that is something to be aware of. And for this reason, we would normally advise students, if they're taking the IB, to take the A language course as opposed to the B language course if it is their native language.
Lovely. Kim?
Yeah, we would accept it, and there are some policies around our language programs which would play into that, and they're all listed on our website.
Lovely. And Amy?
Yeah, it's pretty much a combination of what everybody said. Generally, we will accept it. There are a few programs that have 3 required subjects, so applicants should just check the website before they apply to make sure they meet all of the entry requirements, because in those cases they would be excluded. Or again, if the language was taken early, it would generally be excluded, and it'll focus on the 3 subjects that they're currently studying.
Great. So hopefully that's helped clarify that question. If you've got students who are pondering whether to do an additional qualification in a language that they already speak, particularly international schools, we know that can be quite common. Okay, so for IB students, so IB diploma students, where we're assessing their applications usually on the basis of an overall IB grade, but also subject-specific requirements at higher level. If the applicant meets or exceeds the overall IB grade, but perhaps one of their higher level subjects doesn't meet the entry requirements, would that be an automatic rejection for that student? Would their application still be considered? Is there any chance that they would be made an offer if their higher level subject grades don't meet the requirements? Jake, can I go to you?
Broadly speaking, if the high level grades are part of their offer and they didn't meet it, then they're very unlikely to kind of be confirmed, even if you balance out with points. In short.
Is that fairly standard across all of the institutions here? Yeah, so we're looking at the applicant's overall profile, but also particularly for higher level subjects where there are subject specific requirements and things like maths or sciences or languages, depending on the program that you're applying for, exceeding the kind of overall offer with things like the core project or extended essay wouldn't necessarily be a substitute for those, so it would need to be in both. Okay. How important are IGCSEs, GCSEs, middle year programs, equivalent in any other qualification when we're looking at assessing an applicant? If they've got very, very high predicted A-level IB grades, their IGCSE or GCSE grades are below what we would, I guess, consider competitive, how would they be assessed? Are they automatically likely to be disadvantaged on the basis of GCSE grades? Amy, can I ask you to come in on that?
There's two answers to that. The first is that we do require a specific grade in maths and English language for all programs, though it does vary. So if a student does not meet that requirement and does not indicate that they are resitting, then they will be processed as unsuccessful and we won't carry the application any further. After that, it depends on programs. There are some programs that use the GCSEs as another selection criteria, specifically for some very competitive programs where all of the students have very similar A-level or equivalent qualifications. So they will use the GCSE or equivalent as a selection. But then there are other programs, the one that I'm aware of just because I manage that one is medicine, where we don't use GCSEs at all, other than to meet the maths and English language requirements. So again, it varies from program to program, and I would just recommend that the student does their research and check on the program website to find out that information. And if it's unclear, not just for ourselves, but any university, for them to email or call and just clarify before they apply, so that they don't waste a spot if it is going to be detrimental to their application.
Anything to add? Anybody? I know something that students are often concerned about, and sometimes parents and teachers and schools can be concerned about, is if the student hasn't specifically taken GCSEs or IGCSEs, and they've been studying another curriculum perhaps before joining an IB program or an international school. Are they disadvantaged as a result of that? Stephanie, do you want to?
For us, no, they're not disadvantaged. So in regards to the GCSEs, we're only looking for the English language. But if a student has, say, got a grade 5 or grade 4 in English language GCSE, or below a B grade if they're still doing a curriculum that has letter grades, then what we would do is we'd still assess the application. And if the department would like to make an offer, we give them the opportunity to take another college approved English qualification by a certain date. So that's normally an early date in July. It's normally the UCAS amendment deadline date. So we still would process an application where if someone's got below a 6 or below a grade B in GCSE English. In regards to how we use GCSEs, otherwise we don't really, they're not a selection criteria at all for other elements.
And if a program does list a GCSE specific requirement, so let's say English language or mathematics, and the applicant hasn't taken GCSEs, would we simply look at the middle year program equivalent, or would we be looking at slightly different qualifications, the UCAS reference, for example? How would we evaluate that in cases where a program does specify a particular GCSE grade as a requirement? Kim, can I ask you to address that?
Yeah, so I mean, with all of these things, we look at it by a case-by-case basis, but the more information we can have about a student's background, the better we can make the decision on that. So what I would say, and this might be different to other institutions due to size of and volume of applications they're receiving, but we find it really helpful if the student can email us in and kind of go through their qualifications in detail, because sometimes obviously when they're putting the information into UCAS, there may be only so much information they can put in. So anything contextual to that really helps us to make a decision if it's kind of a little bit different to the norm.
And so more broadly, maybe if that's something that you as advisors or counsellors can put in, if you know that your applicant hasn't taken GCSEs, IGCSEs, or a kind of recognisable equivalent, if you've got access to their information about what they were studying, where they were studying before they joined the school, that could be a useful bit of contextual guidance that you could provide in your UCAS reference. So the admissions assessors do have access to a little bit of background history, even if not GCSEs or a direct equivalent in that regard. Okay. This is an interesting question. How should we justify our predicted grades? So when you're looking at a UCAS reference, are you looking for teachers to justify the predicted grades? Is that the approach that you're taking? What kind of background information would be useful in terms of predicted grades? Perhaps if a student, let's say they've taken GCSEs, perhaps if their GCSE profile is not especially strong, and then they're predicted 2 A stars and an A at A level, maybe that's a useful case study to focus on. Alex, can I ask you?
I would say justify is not the word we would look for. I mean, we trust you as professionals. We trust you that you know the students. So, you know, if you tell us that they're going to get an A or an A star, then we trust you. You know, so that's where we're starting from. In the kind of hypothetical example of a student with maybe not a great academic background, but then there's been really good improvement, then we just like to see something in the reference maybe that shows us why that's happened. That maybe there were some difficult circumstances at GCSE or middle years, maybe they've been overcome, maybe the students just knuckle down and is really engaged with the subjects. Just something that gives us an explanation as to why that's happened, because otherwise there will obviously be questions as to why the predictions don't match with the previous academic record. But in general, we trust you.
Kim?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, we don't take predicted grades as like absolute. So, you know, it's not a case of if you predict a grade and then it comes in slightly under that we'd suddenly be like, never going to trust a predicted grade that comes from this counsellor ever again. We do understand there's a certain amount of movement by it, but I would also say, as much as possible, try to be as realistic with it. And I understand also that, you know, there are many pressures, and I don't think, I'm not saying that counsellors give predicted grades as per a student's desire, but I know there can be lots of pressures with it. So just as realistic as it can be kind of works for us, because obviously once we've made an offer to a student, if they then don't meet that grade and they are coming particularly below that, it's not something that we would necessarily kind of honour moving forward because they didn't hit the grade. So it's in the student's best interests, in our best interest as universities and your best interest as counsellors, to try and be as realistic as possible, though I know that there's lots of kind of things that come into play, and we're not expecting, you know, we're not taking marks saying, you know, this is the third time, you know, sort of thing.
Thank you. Yeah, so we're trying to work with you. We're trying to work with you as schools rather than approaching this with sort of suspicion, I suppose. We want us to be able to give places to the students who are best fit really for our universities and our courses. What's your EPQ, IPQ policy? Is it something that would alter the offer conditions at your university? Head shakes across the board, so none of us include the EPQ. It doesn't alter the offer conditions anywhere. No. Do we care about the EPQ? Is it useful? Stephanie, do you want to add something there?
So it's useful in the context of showing the student's motivation towards the subject, and to get a bit of a sense of the student and what they're interested in. But we have never asked for it in the offer, and we've never taken it in replacement of a lower grade in a subject that we have asked for and they haven't met. So it shows interest in the area, but unfortunately we wouldn't be using it towards an offer condition.
Okay, so it's mainly in the personal statement that a student would be able to demonstrate whether it was useful or how useful it was, I suppose. Does an applicant have to declare all of the qualifications that they've taken? Are they bound to tell us about their disappointing IGCSE scores? Lots of nods of heads there, yes. So, Amy?
We have cancelled applications before where people have withheld information that we have found out about, or UCAS has found out about, because they will get the information from the exam boards and notify us that somebody's application has now been cancelled.
Great, very clear cut there. And what about things like standardized tests? If they've taken, let's say they're applying to US institutions, if they've taken SATs or ACTs, are they obliged to send us those scores if we don't require them? No. And if they do send us those scores, would we look at them?
What I would say is if it's included in a university's entry requirements, because we do include SATs and ACTs in ours, obviously we look at what scores they send through to us. But I think what's become a very common practice, more for students who are thinking of going to US universities, but I can see it starting to kind of move over to the UK, is this idea of super scoring. So taking the SATs, the ACTs a number of times, sending all of the results for all of those through to universities, and then in the US, universities will cherry pick from that. So they'll be able to say, if you sent us in 3 different versions of your SAT, we'd super score you taking the best mark from this one, the best mark from this one, the best mark from this one. We won't do that at SOAS, and I don't believe it's common practice across the UK. So I think if you've got students saying, you know, I'm thinking of doing my SAT multiple times because then I might get a better grade and then I might get into that institution, I would tell them that that's probably not going to happen within the UK. And actually from SOAS's point of view, we actually kind of almost frown upon that, because it's the idea that a student from maybe a more advantaged background who could afford to take a standardized test multiple times will get a place over a student from a disadvantaged background who can only afford to take that SAT once.
Thank you, Kim. That's really helpful. And I think that's a really good example of highlighting the context in which a student even is studying and their circumstances. Stephanie, do you want to add something?
We're slightly different because we take the ACT or the SAT qualification, and so I would just remind people to check the entry requirements of the university before sending us any information, and only sending us relevant information, just, you know, to save on time and costs, because all these things do take there's a cost to sending them to us, and then if we're not using them, you know, it's better if they don't send it to us if we don't accept the qualification.
That's a great point. Amy?
I was going to say the exact same thing as Stephanie. And we've actually on UCL have posted on the website to please not send in unsolicited materials like SATs and ACTs, because we just drown in paperwork and we don't get to it, we don't use it. And if it's costing the student money, it's not a good idea for them to do that. They should wait to either be asked for it or, you know, ask maybe first. But I guess most UK, it sounds like universities are just not using that right now.
Great. And sticking with unsolicited materials for a while, that sounds much more exciting than it probably is. But if students can send, students are often quite keen to send in things like links to their blogs or their YouTube channels or additional references, bodies of work, essays that they've written. Are any of our institutions able or willing to consider those in addition to what we receive through the UCAS application? A few shakes of the head. Stephanie, do you want to?
I was just going to say, please check with the relevant admissions department or relevant university, because some of our departments, so I am the faculty admissions manager for natural sciences. The majority of our departments don't take alternate personal statements and don't take additional information. So please check with the university beforehand, because what we get a lot of is we had a student who applied for architecture for most of their courses, and then maths or life sciences, and wanted a different personal statement. So it goes towards motivation for the course as well, is the justification by our department. So please check, and we're happy to answer any questions. Please contact us.
And I'd add into that, basically wait for the universities to contact you. If they need something else, they're going to let you know, but also to say to the students in that respect, also pay attention to your emails. So everything goes through UCAS in terms of your application, but then universities will subsequently contact you, sometimes through email. So if those students aren't looking at their emails and they see that they've had a request come through from a university for more information, they'll normally have a deadline to which they can provide that information to. And so if they haven't done that, then they might miss out on an offer. And different universities will ask for different things. So, there are some of our programs where a student might not, say, have an arts background, they're applying to an arts program. So we might go back to them and say, okay, you're applying to an arts program, so could you provide us with either some writing that showcases that it's within kind of the arts, or a portfolio that showcases that. So again, it's just worthwhile waiting for that request from a university. If they need it, they will ask you. Otherwise, you're just going to send them lots of information they don't need.
Yeah, and I think particularly institutions where the admissions team are already overwhelmed with processing applications and decision making, the more time that they're spending having to deal with moving things out of inboxes and going back and forth with documents, the longer it will take them to actually process and make decisions on applications. So hold off, and encourage your students to hold off as much as possible. Going back briefly to SATs or ACTs, there have been a couple of follow-up questions on that theme. If a US applicant has already sat the test several times before submitting their UCAS application, can they choose which set of scores they provide on the UCAS application? So can they just report a single test score that had the highest scores, for example? Okay, maybe you're best placed to answer that one.
Yes, for us, they can just pick the one with the highest scores, or it might be the one which had the highest scores in two particular areas that is most akin to the program they're taking. What we won't accept is just multiple tests and then kind of saying, well, I achieved what you wanted in this part, but I achieved what you wanted in this part here.
Thank you. So hopefully that answers your questions. If not, please do type an additional follow-up question if I've misinterpreted that in the Q&A box. So in terms of reference letters, there have been a few questions about references, and if you were unable to attend the session earlier about UCAS references, I think it would be really useful to go back and listen to the recording of that once it's available. There was lots of helpful tips and advice about approaching that earlier today. But one of the questions here is that UK institutions often say they want letter writers to take a positive approach with their UCAS reference. If the counsellor is in a position where the students are perhaps less strong academically, and this does link into predicted grades, how can they express this in a UCAS reference with this theme of sort of a positive approach to reference writing in mind? It's a tricky one, I think. Jake, I'm going to throw this at you.
Oh gosh, I was nodding because it's a tricky one. I think one of the phrases being thrown around quite a lot, and I think is really good, is realism, or being realistic about them. And you can sort of be positive about them, and I'll have other strengths and sort of things that you bring to the table alongside their not as strong academics, perhaps. I think we're probably all here in a privileged position in that there's a degree of self-selection. All those who apply to us are going to be in a strong academic position, so it's sort of not as much of an issue for us. Again, if they're not in a strong academic position, I would ask to really consider if applying to some of our courses would be the right plan, because often we wouldn't make them an offer. So, but that is a rambling answer that probably didn't provide a lot of content, and I'm hoping a colleague has a much more useful answer than myself.
I think that was useful, but Kim, go ahead.
One thing I would say is that we're also aware that students aren't just applying to our one institution. So, and I've sort of said this time and time again during this this conference, is that you will sometimes get a student who's hell-bent on applying to a particular institution, and you as a counsellor look at the entry requirements and you think, this isn't realistically going to happen, but that student says, no, I must apply. But hopefully within their other choices that they make in their UCAS application, they will be minded to pick, you know, 2 aspirational universities. I would still say that even with aspirational universities, it's what they could get into on a good day, as opposed to someone that they can't get into at all. 2 realistic choices to what they're on target for at the moment, and then 1 fallback option. So we're obviously aware that you're not just writing the reference for our one institution. We're aware that you're writing a reference for the multitude of institutions that they're applying to. And so we will, obviously, when we're looking at that, we'll look at their predicted grades, we'll look at your reference. We're not expecting you to write, you know, this student is amazing, the student's going to do absolutely everything that you want them to do, this student's going to be your best student ever. Obviously, in some cases that is true and that is what you would write, but we take that into consideration with, you know, the fact that we can't see who else you're applying to, but we realise you're applying to other universities as well.
Yeah, and I think we know that for teachers and counsellors in schools where there can be often a lot of pressure both from students and parents, often in those cases, it's worth referring the student or the parent back to the university. So we're in a much less difficult position than you are in order to give slightly more, I don't want to say harsh, but slightly more, you know, firm advice to a student about their chances of admission. It's much easier for us to be a bit more explicit, I suppose, about their actual chances of admission versus you, where you're in a teacher counsellor position. You're obviously wanting to maintain positive relationships with the students and the parents longer term. So in those cases, if you really are struggling to put a student off applying to a university where you know it's realistically not a good choice, get in touch with us and we'll try and have a conversation with them and remove some of the struggle from you in that situation. There are a couple of independent counsellors attending the conference, and they are working with private applicants, so students who aren't studying through a particular school or college. Firstly, do we accept applications from private applicants? And what do private applicants do if they're not in a position to obtain a reference or a set of predicted grades? How can they submit a strong UCAS application in that situation? Amy, do you want to start out there?
I think this one's just as tricky as the previous question. We do take them from independent applicants. We do have a number of students that are resitting, so they're also considered an independent applicant because they're not usually going through their school, but can usually get them to provide the reference. At UCL, if they do not have an academic reference, they are going to struggle. So it can come from a tutor or from, I mean, even thinking with homeschooling, it is usually a tutor that they've been able to, even from the past year, to be able to provide the predicted grades and a brief information about them. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to think back. I really don't think I've seen an application over the years from somebody who was an independent applicant who was not able to provide it, except for maybe if they were a mature candidate, in which case sometimes they were able to provide a work reference that could still discuss their aptitude, maybe through training on their job or through some of the training that they've done that the referee has direct knowledge on. But otherwise, they'll just struggle because of the competitiveness of the programs. If we cannot see predicted grades and cannot see maybe a clear path of what they've achieved previously, especially if there's a break in their academic history, without kind of that reference, it will be difficult. And if it is coming from a private tutor, it needs to come from a private tutor with a company, because we can't tell if that private tutor could be your sister's boyfriend or through a company that provides the tutors and is a kind of more of a professional organization. So that's something that we would also request.
I think that's really good advice. It's a tricky area, isn't it? Tricky situation. Stephanie, do you want to add something there?
Yes, I was just going to say, similar to Amy, an applicant would struggle without predicted grades and academic reference. However, what we do is we give our departments the option, if they are, after reading all the information on the application form, if they're interested, that they should interview the applicant. So a lot of my departments don't interview, but in that case where there's no academic reference, if there's no predicted grades, but they do see potential in the student, to invite them for interview.
Great. And I mean, I suppose in a sort of worst case scenario, if the applicant isn't able to get predicted grades, they might be better off applying as a post-qualified applicant in that situation. So wait until they've got their qualification, and then they might be in a stronger position potentially. Okay, so there's a couple of questions, and there's been a little bit of discussion in the Q&A box about some qualifications being easier than others to get into universities with. So this example refers to APs being easier than the IB diploma, and I know that we do hear that quite a lot, but in reference to lots of different qualifications, often used sort of in opposite ways. When we're setting our international equivalencies, how do we do that in order to create a situation where students aren't necessarily going to be in an easier position than others? How do we work out the equivalent AP requirements versus the IB diploma? Alex, do you want to begin?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing to say is that, and I'm sure it's the same for all of us, that we regularly review qualifications. So these things are not set in stone. They do change from time to time. And it's particularly when curriculums change, then we need to do a full reassessment and make sure that our entry requirements are pitched at the same level. The second thing is that we use benchmarking websites like NARIC, where they will look at different qualification systems all over the world and try and give an idea of where everything lies in comparison to everything else. So that's one aspect of looking at it. And the second thing is to say that even though we set our minimum entry requirements, that in some ways it's misleading to think that's definitely you're going to get an offer. It doesn't work that way. We're so competitive that really we're looking at that it really is a minimum. So you may be, for some programs, even exceeding that threshold won't guarantee an offer. So I think you have to bear in mind that, there's never going to be an exact equivalency across different qualifications. There's always going to be some differences in the way that the students are taught and the way that exams are held. But what we're looking for really at the end of the day is that the student has the correct academic preparation to succeed when they come to the university. So we're setting those entry requirements at the point where we believe that the student will achieve and be able to succeed. And that varies across different qualifications. But yeah, absolutely. We look at them all the time. We think about this a lot, and we do change them from time to time.
Thank you. Kim?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, there is no surefire way to make sure that every single qualification is exactly equivalent to every single qualification. And we do find particularly, I mean, I would state the US as an example of this. Sometimes you would find that what might be a certain say an A or a B or a C in A levels will fall in between two component scores in the US. So we often opt for the higher of the two, to be honest with you. But what I would say to your students, if you do have students where you offer an IB program and possibly another program and they're trying to weigh up which they take, the IB program is a particularly strong program. And I do find that students who come into our degrees with the IB diploma do very, very well, because there's a critical thinking approach to it that they have, a skill set they've already developed through the program. So I would say to them is, yes, there may be in their eyes an easier route to get into universities, possibly through taking a different curriculum, but how's that going to serve them when they're actually in a program? And I think the IB diploma is tried and tested, and we've seen the results from it, and we're very, very keen to see IB students. Also, on the other hand, this isn't necessarily true at my institution now, but it is true at some other institutions, that there are a number of scholarships that are open to IB candidates, again, because of the rigor of the program. So that might also be something that plays into their decision making.
Thank you, Kim. And Amy?
Just kind of to reiterate both of those, that looking at the easiest route is not probably the way to go to looking to get into university. It should be looking for the more rigorous, because that's going to probably allow that student to develop other talents or other abilities that will show through on the UCAS application. So while some programs, if you did a Freedom of Information request, might say, well, a lot of the students are coming from the IB or A levels or specific qualifications. It's not because it's a qualification that we have a favor over another. It's that they could be preparing the students for making the application and for demonstrating their interest in that particular subject. The IB is always a good example, just because they are so thorough in developing other skills other than just specific subjects. So they're able to do the critical thinking, they're able to do an extended project. So that's something maybe to look at when considering, but it is something that we look at continuously. I was just thinking about Scottish Advanced Hires. It's not a direct correlation with UK A levels, and we're aware of that when looking at the applications, and it's not always the qualification. It's the whole application that we're going to look at, and what else the students can bring, and not just the academic side.
Thank you all. So hopefully that helped. And I mean, if it comes to it, you could potentially share this recording with your students so they can hear directly from the institutions, and that might help. I mean, things like student forums or student rooms, you know, they're a sort of breeding ground for rumours like this amongst students. So maybe hearing it directly from the institutions might help support your claims and your advice and the guidance that you're already offering to your students. Okay, let's move on to English language qualifications. So do any of our institutions, hopefully this will be a quick one, do any of our institutions accept Duolingo English tests as evidence of English proficiency? No?
UCL was, and I think we still are this year. But I would recommend looking on the website, because there might be specific tests within the Duolingo that we're not accepting for this year. But for the previous couple of years, we have been.
Great. And Stephanie?
Yes, we are at the moment. So we accepted it for October 2021 and 2022, but it will be reviewed for 2023. So the information will be on our website once it's available.
Great. And I think I'm right in saying across the board that we don't require evidence of English language at the point of UCAS submission. It's if you're made an offer, that's when we require it. So if students are panicking already about 2023 acceptance, just put them at ease by just saying it's only something that happens at the point of an offer anyway. So there's plenty of time for 2023 admission. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the personal statement. And again, I would recommend having a listen to yesterday's session about the personal statement. That was really helpful, and there was lots of questions that were asked a lot of the time about the personal statement there. But is there a set weighting for the personal statement, and does this weighting vary course to course, institution to institution? Jake, can I come to you?
In short, yes, there is a weighting, but it does vary course to course and institution to institution. For some of our courses, as I said in the session yesterday, it's just a binary yes, no. Does it seem appropriate? Will we use it? So it's not really a weighting, it's more of just something we look at rather than a weighting. For others, we have ranking systems, and it has a proportion of that assigned to the personal statement, but it varies between courses. Broadly, subject areas would have roughly the same ranking systems, but otherwise, yeah, it's course to course. It's never a large proportion though. The biggest ones would always be year grades and other aptitude tests as well that come into it.
Okay, and obviously then for institutions that don't interview, that don't use admissions tests, then naturally the personal statement is going to be a more important part of our selection process. But I think this is something that we know students and counsellors are always really keen to get a kind of grasp of what our set percentage weighting is for each element of admissions test personal statements, and it really just doesn't operate in such a way necessarily. We're looking at the applicant as a full package rather than being able to section off all of these different parts of the UCAS application. And kind of strong personal, sorry Kim, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, even with how universities weight the personal statements in decisions for different courses, the thing about the personal statement is it's just giving a qualitative and it's not just, it's giving a qualitative context to quantitative results that we have, predictions that we have, you know, those kind of things. And I think that's really, really important for students to think about, even if, say, their particular program they're applying at their particular institution says this would only be 5% of what we're looking at, it's still an important 5%.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's not going to change the way that you necessarily approach writing the personal statement or the advice or guidance that we give. Yeah, that's great. And can a strong personal statement, could it make up for entry requirements below the minimum requirements? Is that how we use it, or is it in order to differentiate? That's a good shake of the collective shake of the heads there. So the personal statement is something that we'd use as a differentiating factor rather than a substitute for, I think, the minimum academic requirements across the board. One of the questions, and a couple of the questions actually, ask about the importance of supercurricular work and extracurricular work. So when we're assessing an applicant and when we're looking particularly at personal statements, how important are things like supercurricular and extracurriculars? And connecting to that, where so many students have had those opportunities reduced somewhat by things like the pandemic, what kind of advice could we give to counsellors to give to students about ways that they can write personal statements with that in mind? Amy?
It's going to, again, vary from program to program and probably through the different institutions about whether or not the extracurricular will be used as kind of an assessment, especially since there's always been the rumblings that UCAS is going to take the personal statement away. There are some programs that are now trying to look at other ways of doing the assessment, but some of us still look at that very heavily. We are aware that because of COVID, a lot of students aren't able to do some of the extracurricular activities or enrichment activities that they used to do that were maybe through the school or outside of that. But we found that students are still very resourceful and can do things on their own time. And it could be doing additional research, doing online activities. It could be through hobbies that they do. I'm just thinking of different programs. It doesn't have to necessarily be work experience with a particular company or organization, but the students who are really passionate about their subject are finding ways around the constraints that COVID has placed on them to find other ways to show their interest in the programs and doing stuff outside of school, or trying to do more activities or organizing more activities through their school or informally with people that they know. It really just depends on the program.
Thank you, Amy. Anything to add? Anybody?
Just a couple of things just to add, and I agree with Amy 100%. We know that not everybody has the same opportunity to access extracurricular, supercurricular activities, so we take that into account. So we're aware of that. And also just to say that if you are including those activities in the application on the personal statement, it really should relate to the subject area. So it's there as a reinforcement, a kind of a way to show your difference, that you are really committed and really engaged with the subject. So, you know, try and link it back to the subject, try and make it relevant. That's the way to make a really competitive personal statement.
Yeah, and I think this applies to everything. So one of the questions that was asked was about summer courses, whether summer courses increase a student's chances of admissions. And unless it's something like a WP scheme, and when we're looking at sort of contextual admissions, in and of itself, doing a summer school short course, anything like that, doesn't necessarily make a student more competitive. It's how they can talk about it in the personal statement, what they actually gain from doing it. Did they just turn up and then switch off for a week, or were they actually engaged? Did they learn something beneficial? So that applies for all of a couple of questions asking quite similar things. So that applies for all of those different aspects of things that they're talking about there. Now, in terms of processing times, why do some students hear back before others, even if they've applied at the same time? Kim?
I would say it can depend on what they've put in the application, or it could also depend on what they've sent in after being requested for it, subsequent information. So I do sometimes get, schools where I've had multiple students from one school apply to us, and the school counsellor said, I don't understand why this student got their offer, but this student didn't. And it sometimes is as simple as I wrote to all, say, 3 students, and one of them sent in the information that I needed and the other 2 hadn't. So there can be any number of reasons. It can also be by program. So, we have some programs that are much more competitive to get into. We have some programs that have a lot more applications than others. So that can also change things. So it will be dependent on the applications themselves, what they're for, and what they've provided us with.
Thank you, Kim. Anything to add, anybody else? No? I think, sorry, Stephanie, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, only to say, to warn counsellors, we can't discuss other people's applications as well. So we do get that quite often, like so-and-so has applied to us, their friend has done this. We can't discuss other people's applications. We'll do our best to try and get decisions out to people as quickly as possible, but we can't discuss other people's applications.
Thank you. Jake?
Just say, as a counsellor, if you feel that one individual has taken a disproportionate amount of time to others, it is sometimes worth flagging with the institution or getting them to try and flag. People can get stuck, and we all have different systems. UCAS sends information to us, and sometimes that doesn't work. So it's always worth flagging just in case that person has been stuck somewhere in the system. It's very rare, very, very rare, but it's always worth just giving just a quick email or something to King's or other institutions to say, are you taking a long time because you're taking a long time, or is there something wrong here? It's just worth flagging.
One other very quick point, which is to say that waiting for a decision is not necessarily always a bad thing, because generally what it means is that you're a competitive applicant and that you're still in the mix for an offer. Whereas if you get a very quick decision, then often that means it's an unsuccessful decision. So that you just maybe advise students of that as well, that it's not necessarily a bad thing to wait a little bit longer for a decision.
Yeah, and I mean, we completely appreciate it's frustrating for the student. It's difficult for you as counsellors to work with and speak to parents when their students are very stressed about waiting for decisions. But as Alex said, it's not that we're just sitting on decisions that we've already made. It's that we're processing and readdressing applications. Amy?
I was also going to say that, especially if people are not familiar with the UCAS process, that we need to wait until all of the on-time applications are received at the end of January, so that we don't give out all of our offers early and receive a huge increase of applications. Usually we do start to receive them towards the end of January, and they're just as competitive as the ones that we made offers to in December. So a lot of them we have to hold back so that we can compare them all and then start to make some of the offers. I do understand that, when schools send in the applications, they kind of are judging some of their candidates to be very similar, where when we receive them, maybe we don't. We've put them into different kind of gathered fields, and we're just waiting to see for the other applications to come in, see where we can start to make the offers, but a lot of them aren't going to start going out until after the new year.
Thank you. And our web pages do try and be as clear as possible about our processing time. So we'll have things like admissions calendars that will kind of give students a bit of a timeline before they apply. We send out emails to try and keep students up to date with the process, so they're not just sort of waiting in a big void. We do try and maintain some level of communication whilst we're making and processing our decisions. Okay, do you anticipate having any spaces available this year through extra or clearing? And I guess this will vary a bit university to university, maybe.
We at SOAS may have some, but it's always, you know, not necessarily a guarantee, and it will depend on the particular programs. So what I'd say to students is you can check back with us during clearing, but I wouldn't be banking on clearing places.
King's often does go into clearing, so never say never. Just again, watch this space. We also run a superstar scheme that's very likely to run this year. So if you have high grades, you can often apply for courses which are full. But again, check our web pages and just keep an eye on how things are going.
Stephanie?
The way we structure our offer making process is so we offer for more places than we have. So normally, unfortunately, we don't go into clearing or extra. So unfortunately, not for us. But you know, never say never. It might happen. So you can always check our web pages during the August period. But normally, no, not for us.
Great, thank you. So yeah, advice is sort of same as I guess previous years. Keep an eye on the website. If any vacancies do become available, they'll be published there. Do any of our institutions accept students who are under 18 at the age of registration? Are there any potential issues there with any particular courses? Amy, I'm going to come to you. I'm thinking about medicine related programs mainly.
Medicine at UCL, students do need to be 18 at the start of the program. There are other medical schools that don't have that requirement, and it is just based around when students will start their placements. So we do need students to be of legal age when they start the program, because during the first year, they will be going on to placements. Otherwise, I cannot think of another program at UCL. We will do kind of a safeguarding before we do make an offer. We want to see that there is a guardian in place, and we will take care of that as we go through the process. So sometimes if students think their application is stuck, kind of going back to previous discussions, it's because we've sent out information about under 18, and students really do need to either keep an eye on their email, their junk email, and with UCL, we have a UCL applicant portal. So anything that goes out is logged into that portal. So if they are unable to access their email or their school, they're using their school account and there's a firewall on it and our emails can't get through, they are always registered in the portal so that they can go and see what's the latest that they've heard from us that they haven't responded to us.
Okay, great. Any other courses? Are there any issues there with engineering related programs, Stephanie?
So actually, no, we are just dealing with an applicant who's under 16, but they're a UK national, so that's okay. So the only thing that I was going to say is like UCL for medicine, they have to be over 18 or over at the start of the course. For all other courses, so in natural sciences and engineering, we do take applicants who are under 18 and on a rare occasion under 16. And so if they're under 16, there is a lot more hurdles and checks and meetings and forms to fill in, but it does happen. The only restriction that we have is that we are not sponsored for international students. We don't sponsor children's student route visas. So if they're under 16 and need a student visa, then that's the only hurdle I can think of. But the one that we have this year is a UK national. So they're all good to go. So once all the checks are done and all the extra paperwork is done, we just make them a regular offer on UCAS and follow the normal processes. But there's special things that need to be happening. If a student is not 18 on the first day of the course, they can't live in the same accommodation and things like that. So there's all these extra checks that we do.
Perfect. Jake?
Just to flag that for us, if they're under 16, we'll ask the parents and the individual in for an interview, just to meet with all the relevant individuals, just to kind of discuss what it's like to be on a UK campus and what the laws and rules are in his country too. If somewhere works in their favour, so from the US to here, the drinking age is lower, happy days for those students, but I know in other areas the laws might go the other way. So it's just highlighting those sort of things. You also get a different style card as well, which outright says you're under 18, so you can't be cheeky and go to the student bars and things like that. So yeah, there's extra consideration there, but it's all just check that they're ready and academically rigorous enough to sort of pursue a career, and echo everything everyone else has said about visas and medicine and various things like that.
Great, thank you, Jake. And Amy?
I was just going to add with Stephanie's, I think with students, if they're under 16, while we also will not sponsor a visa, they have to be a UK national. If they're a UK national, I think we do require that their parent resides with them until they are over 16, and then we can deal with, you know, them moving into special halls or something. But until they're 16, we do need their parent here in the UK with them.
Great, thank you very much. Can a student, if they're already studying at a university, whether that's in the UK or overseas, would they be considered for a transfer to our institution? So do we look at any kind of second year transfer applications? What would be the process there? And again, I'm conscious this might be quite different across universities. Kim?
We do look at transfer. The only thing for students to bear in mind is if we have taken in a full cohort the year before, and if nobody's left us, there may not be any spaces for them to join into the second year. And then the other thing we do is we map what they've already studied against what they would have studied within our institution. And if there are fundamental aspects of that that aren't there, then we wouldn't be able to take them into the second year of our program because there's no real space for them to then undertake those modules. So I get this a lot from the US. We have a lot of students applying to us. I would say it's more likely they would get into some of our programs, in particular our humanities-based programs, than necessarily our social sciences programs, where sometimes they don't have those particular aspects. And I'm sure that within this room, there's a lot of those offering STEM subjects where, you know, it's going to be much harder to make sure. So, and quite often it would be students who have taken 2 years of their undergraduate degree in the US, then coming over into my second year rather than taking 1 year and coming year for year.
Okay, great. And Stephanie?
Pretty much the same as Kim. So it's dependent on if there's any spaces within the second year. It varies from year to year, depending on cohorts. So please check before making applications. We only take applications through UCAS. There's a fee for UCAS, and we wouldn't want them to spend the fee if there is absolutely no chance and we're not going to be able to offer them anything. And this might be specific to admission to Imperial, but we have a policy that they need to meet also the first year entry requirements. So say, unfortunately, if they got maybe 2 Ds and a C in their A levels, and then they're wanting to try and apply for a year 2 entry, unfortunately that wouldn't, if they don't meet our first year entry requirements as well, we wouldn't be able to consider them. And that's all listed in our admissions policy as well.
Just very quickly to add for LSE, it's very similar, but this is really one of those cases where you need to do your research. So for all the institutions, look at what's possible and what's required. For LSE, certain departments, certain programs do allow second year entry and some departments don't. So, you know, you need to make sure of that before you submit the application.
And could a student potentially, if they are studying at another university, if they're happy to restart their degree, could they apply for first year entry on the basis of their existing university profile?
As long as Stephanie said, as long as they meet the entry requirements of the first year, and then obviously they're doing well at their current institution.
Great. Okay. And I think we're all, particularly if they're quite far on into their degree program, we all have graduate study opportunities as well. So that if you are working as an independent counsellor advising students, it might be a better option to maybe advise them to consider graduate study options across our institutions as an alternative. If they're really keen to spend time with us, that might be better than restarting a degree. Okay, we're coming up to the end of our sessions, probably time for a couple more quick questions. Can a student appeal a decision? If a student's been unsuccessful, are there any grounds for appeal, and what would those be? Alex?
Yeah, I can answer this. I mean, it will depend on our individual admissions policies, but I'm sure they're going to be pretty similar in that, yes, if there's been a process error or procedural error, an administrative mistake, then there is grounds for appeal. If it's an academic decision, then unfortunately, no, that can't be appealed. That's not subject to appeal.
Is that pretty similar for all of the institutions here? Yeah, okay. If a student is made an offer for a particular programme, and then they decide after receiving that offer that they want to switch to another degree programme, is there any flexibility on that? And I suppose extend that out to if they come to register at the institutions, what kind of scope is there for moving between departments' degrees? Stephanie?
Actually, some of our departments say that they would like the suggestion before the UCAS deadline of the 26th of January. So after that date, they won't consider any alternative course choices. So when it comes to us, if they've made one application, we don't consider them for multiple programs, they need to switch. And so some of our departments have said they won't do that past the 26th of January.
Great. Anything to add, anybody, Jake?
Just it's a maybe from us, and it often depends if the course is competitive or not. If you're looking to get into law from something else, almost definitely not, and that applies for early on in the process or later on. We have some individuals who enroll onto courses which may have lower grade profiles to try and then subsequently transfer onto ones which have higher grade profiles. They'll get blocked every time, so it is not a valid route. I wouldn't advise anyone pursuing that as a potential.
Yeah, and again, sharing this recording with students, again, we appreciate you're in a very difficult position sometimes as counsellors and advisors. Maybe sharing this recording, the snippet of this recording would be helpful for students considering taking that pathway. Stephanie, did you want to add something in there?
Yes, I was just going to say about people doing admissions tests. So for our medicine courses, they have BMAT. So again, they wouldn't be able to switch after the 15th of October deadline. So once the application, if they wanted to make an application for medicine, but they've actually applied for maybe maths, and they want to switch after the 15th of October, we wouldn't allow that. If so, any admissions tests, so our maths courses have MAT, medicine has BMAT, so admissions tests should be taken into account when requesting a transfer as well.
Great, thank you. So hopefully that's helpful tips and advice for those of you in tricky situations trying to advise students. I think with the final question I'm just going to ask quickly is about COVID, and this is something that came up in the reference session earlier. What kind of information should or do you expect advisors to provide in their UCAS reference in regard to COVID related disruption? Amy, can I ask you to begin?
We don't really have an expectation because it's going to vary from place to place and how it's affected them, and some schools might have somehow managed to get through it, while others had a lot of staff sicknesses or had problems getting equipment to students. So it really is particular to that school and whether or not they think it's relevant to the application to that student. Sometimes they put information in that's specifically about the school, but it's not relevant to that student, in which case they need to think of whether or not that's going to be taking up space in their reference when they could be addressing something better with the about the student. And some schools do put in maybe links to save that space to their website that might reference something about what's either contextual or COVID. And that I would recommend more, so that you have more time in the reference to talk about the student and why they're suitable for either the institution or the program.
I think that's really good advice. That I guess don't feel obliged to have to mention COVID. We know that it's happened. We know that there'll be some kind of level of disruption, but like any other thing that you'd be mentioning in the reference, make sure that it's relevant to the student's circumstances and their performance.
Maybe if it's it had a huge impact on a certain class that was being taught, or on the student themselves, if they experienced illness or bereavements or something that was very specific to the student. Otherwise, we do understand, and it is taken into account when we look at the applications.
That's great. Thank you all. Well, that concludes our admissions panel session for today. Thank you to the panelists for your detailed answers, your time, your engagement with the session. And councillors, thank you all very much for attending. I hope that this conference has been helpful. We hope that you've enjoyed and found it informative. And we know that you are we're crossing lots of different time zones with this event, so you may not have been able to sit through all of the sessions in one fell swoop. So the sessions are being recorded. The recordings will be available on the UCL World Class Study in London Councillors Conference event page that I think Petrova's just mentioned in the chat. There will also be a follow-up email being sent out that will ask for some feedback, so we can look at how we run this event in the future, make any improvements based on your suggestions and your feedback. But thank you all very much for attending. Petrova, is there anything you'd like to add to conclude today's session?
Just only thank you, you said it all, and also that if there are any unanswered questions or you want to go into a bit more detail with a particular university about an issue, then the Connect rooms are going to be open and you'll have links to those in the chat. So please do visit, and also some students from different academic areas will be available in some of those rooms. Otherwise, thank you. Goodbye. Thank you very much. Goodbye. I'm going to end the session now. So.